I mean, the important thing for people to understand is that something remarkable happened in the 1930s that has shaped our society ever since. The Great Depression from 1929 to 41 is the defining moment of the economic history of the United States. I want to remind everyone that during that time, the working class of the United States went big time to the left politically. For those who live in the present and see that the working class is at best mixed in its attitudes towards the political system, there wasn't much disagreement in the 1930s that what we needed was something that would nowadays be called socialism of one kind or another. The president at the time, Roosevelt, didn't choose to use that term because it would have made what he was forced to do even more difficult. What he was forced to do was to recognize that the capitalist system wasn't working and that it needed major supports, even just to be tolerable to the mass of the American people. And remember, in 1929, you were only 12 years after the Soviet Revolution in Russia, and people had that in their minds. They knew what people could and would do if and when a system was no longer tolerable. Now, just to remind folks, so what happened? They passed bills that Americans can't even imagine today. In the midst of a depression, when the government has no money. Why not? Because millions of people are unemployed. And if you're unemployed, you don't earn an income. And if you don't earn an income, you don't pay an income tax. And if tens of thousands of businesses were bankrupt, which they were, they don't function and they don't pay taxes either. So the government had no money. It passed the Social Security system. For the first time in American history, if you're 65 years of age or older, the government is going to give you a check every month for the rest of your life. Wow, that's helping the average person big time. It means not just that elderly people have a decent retirement, but it means that their children don't have to scrimp and save to keep grandma and grandpa in a tolerable situation. So it helped everybody, the elderly, but their families, their children as well. No sooner was the ink dry on that bill than they passed the first minimum wage in this country. We had never had that before. No employer can pay less than a certain minimum because it's indecent to treat people that way. Then we had unemployment insurance. We had never had any of these things before. You lose your job through no fault of your own, which at that time meant tens of millions of Americans. We're going to give you a check every week for a year or two to help you through this difficulty. And then the biggest of all, the government became the employer of last resort. 15 million people who were unemployed, had no money, felt awful about it, got a job working in something the government thought was important. Some of our earliest ecological efforts were made then. You know,
Sure.
the WPA would
Hmm.
put art everywhere, theater and poetry everywhere. We did really wonderful things for the American people.
Yeah.
And here comes the best part. Who paid for all of this? The government couldn't. It didn't have any money. So Mr. Roosevelt, the president, who had been approached by the communists and the socialists and the big union movement of that time, the CIO, he understood if he disappointed these people, he wouldn't be the president much longer. So he went to the rich from which he came. He was a elite family in this country, and he went to the rich and he said, "You better give me the money to do all these things, because if you don't, we're going to have a revolution, and you're not going to have any money to give anybody at all." And that scared them. Half of them, only half, went with the president. The other half became what we later understood to be the John Birch Society and the basics of what MAGA is today. They are the ones who didn't go along. But Mr. Roosevelt had enough of them, together with a unified working class, and all those bills were passed. Now, why do I say it's a defining moment? because everything since then, since 1945, when the war was over, when Roosevelt died, the business community was freaked out. Remember that in World War II, roughly 1941 or 2 to 1945, not only was all of this happening that I just described, but the United States was officially allied with the Soviet Union in the war against fascism. If you went to the post office in 1943 or 44 to pick up, say, a bunch of stamps for your mail, you would see over the clerk's window a picture of Uncle Sam arm in arm with somebody identified as Uncle Joe. And that stood for Joseph Stalin, who was celebrated alongside our president because they were the two big, powerful countries against the Japanese and German governments in World War II. So, what happened afterwards, and of which Mr. Trump is just a part, is the undoing of everything that happened in the 1930s, which was called, by the way, the New Deal. So think of the last 75 years as a program to reverse, to undo, stop taxing corporations and the rich, because that's how he got the money. He went to them and he said, you got to give me your money. I'm going to tax you for half of it, and you can lend me the rest of it, and I'll pay you back someday, maybe. But the point was, everything after that had to be reversed. Stop taxing corporations and the rich. We've been doing nothing else for the last 75 years. Stop spending money to help the mass of people. That companies have been hesitant to do for fear of what it will do to the people. Mr. Trump is simply willing to go the next step. And so he brings in Elon Musk to do that savaging of our federal employee force under the completely fake notion that this has anything to do with efficiency. It doesn't. It's undoing the New Deal. The business community, and let me remind everyone, according to the United States Census, 3% of Americans are employers. The other 97% of us are not. But this is a program since 1945 designed, developed, and now imposed on us as the undoing of the New Deal. It has been developed over the 75 years and reaches its peak in that thing called Project 2025 that we heard about during the campaign when Mr. Trump said he didn't know what it was. Well, he is now carrying it out. I've read it step by step, point by point. If he didn't know what it was, then either he was not telling us the truth, could you imagine it? Or he didn't want us to understand too clearly. But I'm here to tell you, as a professional economist, that's what this is all